Richard and I actually met 30-ish years ago. I know neither of us look like we could have been more than in kindergarten at this time. But I worked at a very large bookstore called the Tattered Cover Bookstore, and we hosted his first book, Nobody's Fool there, and then of course his famousest book, Empire Falls. And so it's so wonderful to be going full circle and be able to introduce him again. Although there are other people that are being introduced here today. This is the second of what we hope to be a very long annual lectures. Not long, like today's gonna be long, but they're gonna last for a long time. And the theme of civic engagement and leadership. I have a couple housekeeping things because we always do. Cell phones, what do we do with those? Yes, good, we all learned. We have York's independent bookstore, the Book Tenders, will be selling Richard Russo's books in the back. So when you leave, you don't have to buy a book, but they certainly would love it if you did. And Richard will be signing those books. If you aren't familiar with the Book Tenders, it's down across from Hannaford. It's absolutely a lovely bookstore. And there's holidays coming up, so both Richard's books and other books can be really appropriate for that. We are going to have light hors d'oeuvres afterwards. We are going to have a question and answer. Now this event is dedicated to Dan Bancroft, and the Dan Bancroft, gonna get your name straight, Brad, eventually. The Dan Bancroft Memorial Endowment for Civic Leadership and Engagement, to honor his dedication and passion for libraries and community involvement. Dan's dedication to community service is very, very well known in York. He was an incredible man. He had 45 years as a criminal lawyer, or as a trial lawyer, excuse me. He moved to York with his wife Anne, and he was on the board of the library. He was the president of the board of the library. He wrote for the York Weekly. He was a substitute teacher at the middle school, which, I mean, blessings to him for that alone. And he was also a playwright. Dan was an absolutely extraordinary man, and we are so delighted that we are able to remember him here today. I would like to introduce Dan's daughter, Elizabeth, and turn my microphone on over to her.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth, one of Dan's 3 children. My brother and my sister are here today as well, along with a few grandkids who you may hear a little bit of throughout. We want to thank you all for being here. It's really nice to see so many of you. Our dad really loved Richard Russo as a storyteller and as a writer, and he would have been so excited for this talk and really just so tickled by this whole thing. I have a collection of Russo books that my dad sent me as he was reading them. And I think one of the things that drew him to Russo's writing was his focus on people and on communities. My dad shared these interests, as might have been evident to any of you who's read his articles in the York Weekly or read or saw one of his plays. Even long before he was officially a writer, our nightly bedtime stories carried these themes. There was Walter Hamburger Bamberger, the world's greatest child detective, who solved local mysteries that often turned out not really to be all that mysterious. And there was Bridget Ridge, a giant who, after disaster struck in a nearby town of regular-sized people, and the bridge between their homes and their work fell down, stood in the split and let them walk over her arms to get across. In each story, someone would climb into her ear on their way to work and ask advice on some problem, some issue they needed to solve. And Bridget would get it, and she'd hear how things turned out when they came back across her arms the other way. As I'm sure many of you know, my dad could and did talk to anybody and everybody. One time when I'd been living in Chicago for maybe 6 months, he came to visit, and he couldn't stop talking about this really, really interesting woman he met on the plane on the way out. We went downtown the next day, and we ran into her at an art exhibit that they'd talked about. We didn't see anyone I knew the whole weekend, but my dad had a way of forming community wherever we were. That story, our bedtime stories, may not be what first comes to mind when we think about civic leadership or civic engagement, but I think it's a huge part of what it meant to my dad. How everyday people interact with those around them to make their lives even a little bit better, a little bit richer, and build community. I think it's also what drew him to towns like York. He loved cities, he loved museums and big shows, but really he loved people. What makes them tick, what makes them unique, how their lives can be a story, and how those stories weave together. We're really, really grateful to the library and to everyone who supported the fund that makes this afternoon possible. It's an honor to his memory. My mom's gonna come up and do a little more introduction and then we'll get to the main event.
So, Mr. Russo, we are very glad and honored to have you with us this afternoon. My guess is that most everyone here is familiar with your writing, perhaps less so with your life story. I won't tell all of it, I don't know much of it, but I do want to share that you were born in Johnstown, New York, and raised in nearby Gloversville, which I learned was the veritable glove-making capital of the country, until gloves were no longer that popular after World War II. Your academic awards were earned at the University of Arizona, a bachelor's degree, a master's in fine arts, a doctorate in philosophy. You were teaching college when your first book, Mohawk, was published in 1986, and 10 years later, you left teaching to pursue writing full-time. Sad for your students, no doubt, but to the benefit of your larger following. 3 more novels followed Mohawk, The Risk Pool, Nobody's Fool, and Straight Man, and in 2001, Empire Falls was published, earning you the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for fiction. With this honor, you joined the rare company of distinguished storytellers, which means that today, for this hour, we are also in the company and in their company, and grateful to you for bringing your very skillful artistry of observation among us. 5 additional novels, several collections of short stories, and 3 nonfiction books. You have been prolific. You told Alden Mudge in a book page online interview, and I'm not sure how long ago that was, and I'm only slightly paraphrasing. It is no secret that in my books, I'm trying to make the comic and the serious rub up against each other just as closely and uncomfortably as I can. My books are odes to a nation that even I sometimes think may not exist anymore, except in my memory and my imagination. I just pray for continued good health, you said, because I've got other stories to tell. Lucky for us. And maybe that is the answer to the question you offered us for today. But in any event, we hope you will tell us definitively, Mr. Russo, why you write. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, is that on? I guess it is.
No.
Oh. How about now?
No.
Still no? Oh, now there. All right. This is a wonderful event. Thank you all so much for coming today. It's wonderful to be here. Although I think we should begin probably with a moment of honesty and just say that, you know, you're really here. You're really here today in the hopes that for the next hour or so, you won't have to think about the election, right? Yeah. Just so long as you know that that's why I'm here too. So, okay. Why do I do this? Why do I write? Sometimes, maybe it's a little bit easier to start at least, with a couple of reasons that are not why I write. What do I not write for? I don't write for money. And that may seem like an odd and possibly disingenuous thing to say, but it's certainly true in the sense that when I broke in, when I was doing my apprenticeship, there was really no reason to believe that I would ever make much money. Not writing the kinds of books that I wanted to write. it's one of the great mysteries of my life, actually, that I have been able to write the kinds of books that I wanted and make a really good living as a literary writer when not many literary writers do. The sad fact is that when I was doing my apprenticeship, and even more, it's even more the case now, that if you want to be a literary writer, you probably have to be also a teacher somewhere, and that probably is going to be your full-time gig where you make most of your money. You are probably, either if you're not that, you're going to be a reporter or a cab driver, or you're going to be doing something that pays your bills, but it's not going to be writing. The vast majority of writers who are not writing in the genres, you know, if you're not writing what Stephen King writes, or what the romance novelist writes, or what thriller writers write, if you're not doing those kinds of things, well, you can make a lot of money. But if you're not doing one of those things, chances are you're not going to be making enough money to live on. The fact that I have somehow managed to dodge that truth, that reality, continues to astonish me to this day. If I don't do it to make money, if I never did it to make money, then why on earth? Because an apprenticeship in writing, I mean, you have to go and do the same things that any profession does. If you're going to be a doctor, you go to med school. If you're going to be a lawyer, you go to law school, and those things take time, and also cost a lot of money that you're then going to have to find some way to pay back. Well, with doctors and lawyers, they generally have a way to do that. With writers, especially with literary writers, you're going to incur a lot of the same debts, but the apprenticeship actually lasts a lot longer. Because when you get that MFA, the thing that allowed me to put out kind of a shingle that said I was a writer, when you get that degree, it allows you to talk about yourself as a writer, but it doesn't make you one, right? It just says that you have this degree, and for most of us, and for me in particular, that was really just the beginning. When I finished my degree, it was the beginning of my apprenticeship, which continued for long, long, long years. And I would say, as I used to say when I was teaching, if you want to be a writer, please know that you could do almost anything else and make a living faster than what you've just chosen to do. So don't do it for that reason. So if not for that reason, why? Well, for me, and for a lot of writers who write what we call literary fiction, which I suppose is just another genre, but for most of us, we consider it, I don't want to get all religious on you, but most of us think of it as a calling. Most of us think of it as a vocation. And one of the reasons we kind of recognize that is that most of us hear that calling, most of us feel the need to do this thing long, long, long before we're any good at it at all. And that's something that I find to be just generally true of not just writers, but artists in general. I know very few artists who, there are some, John Cheever famously published his first short story. The first short story that he wrote was accepted by the New Yorker. That's just showing off, number one. But it happens really rarely that you meet with that kinds of success, which means that something has to keep you going during that time when you're not making much money, you're falling deeper and deeper into debt. Why would you do it? It's because you can't figure out how not to. It's really what it comes down to. So the apprenticeship lasts for a long time. The state of the profession has never been particularly helpful to writers, especially literary writers. But for the most part, we keep doing it because it's probably, number one, it's a calling, but it's probably the only calling. If we can't do that, what on earth would we do? I still don't have any answer to that. The second reason I don't write, I mentioned because I think it's particularly important. I don't write in order to share with my readers what I know. Most writers, I think, whether you're literary type writers or writing in the genres. We don't write to share what we know. We write in order to figure out what we know. What we're attracted to is not knowledge. We're not trying to convey information. What we're really interested in, I think, is mystery, obsession. Look at some of your favorite writers. Have you ever, there are exceptions to this. There are certain writers that I think of who are driven by curiosity. And each book is very different from the last one. And so you'll read, I always think of Jane Smiley in this regard, because she said famously at one point that she wanted to write one of every single kind of book. And proved that by one of her books early on was an Icelandic saga of some sort, which if you're doing that, you probably do want to write every kind of book there is. But she's a very curious writer. And her wonderful books are a testimony to that curiosity. She just wants to know everything that there is to know out there and share it. However, I would say that for every Jane Smiley, there are an awful lot more people, an awful lot more artists, an awful lot more readers, writers like me, who have what I would call just a very narrow bandwidth. I do triage. I've always done a kind of triage when I start a book, or when I'm thinking about, or just when I'm dealing with daily experience. The vast majority of what I experience in my life, talking with people, overhearing conversations, reading books, interacting with people, all the things that we just classify as normal daily experience, I immediately triage into one of two categories. One is very large, the other is very small. The very large one is, oh, that's interesting, but not for me. And then there's the very, very small one. It's about the size of this manila folder, right? Everything that I'm interested in would fit in here. It's a very, very narrow bandwidth. But what I'm interested in, I simply cannot do without, and I return to it obsessively. If you've been reading my work, you know what I'm talking about in terms of that narrow bandwidth, because I keep coming back to the same obsessions over and over and over again. Not because I only have one book in me, but because those obsessions are so ingrained in me, they are so important to me, that I actually relish the fact that I'll never get to the bottom of them. That's what keeps me going. It's not that I hope with the next book I'll succeed in something that I didn't succeed in with the last one. I know that's never going to happen. I know that I'm never going to get to the bottom of what I obsess about. But that's the good news. So, why do I write? We've now dispensed with the why I don't write. So why do I write? I think it has something to do with genetics, but maybe not in the sense that you would think, because there weren't any other writers in my family before me. My father, though, was an extraordinary bullshitter. A bullshitter of just, it just still stuns me. Summers, after my mother and I moved to Arizona, my parents split up when I was young, and I moved to Arizona, where I did all my degree work. That was during the year. But summers I would return home to Gloversville, and my father was, put it this way, not a literary man. He was a laborer. He was a member of the Laborers Union, and then later on the Pipe Fitters Union. And summers I would go back and work road construction with him. I did it all 4 years as an undergraduate, and then a couple years in graduate school. Every summer I would be back working road construction with him. And there were all manner of stories. We used to live where we lived was about a mile from Albany, which is the local that we both belonged to. And so we would drive an hour there every day, And often something funny would happen. And it only took us an hour to get there, but it took us about 3 hours to get home because you had to stop at every bar along the way. That was the rule. And every time we would stop, my father would tell that funny story of what happened, right? And the next day, maybe he'd be doing the same thing. But I began to notice that the story got better and better every time he told it, because he had been paying attention to what got laughs the first time and what didn't, and what was surprising about the story, what interested them. And so he would tell the story again and again and again. Sometimes to the point where he would say to me, he would tell me the story. And I would say, Dad, I was there. Remember? I was there. But by that point, my participation in the events didn't mean anything to him. He was just telling a really good story. And that was my first lesson, which you're going to need if you're going to be a writer. What's the word, right? What was he doing? Revising. which, as we all know, is absolutely essential to a writer. Revise, revise, revise. And while he wasn't a literary man, he had come to the same conclusion, I think, interestingly, that Mark Twain came to, because before he became a serious writer, he was a kind of raconteur. He would go on the road and he would tell stories. And he did pretty much the same thing my father did. He would test his stories out every night with a new audience. He'd go to a new town. He would tell the same story he told last night, but they would always be a little bit different. And they would always be because of the way the audience the night before had reacted to it. So there's that. My father, as I said, was not a literary man, but that was my first lesson in becoming a writer, was just listening to him bullshit. And watch that story just get better and better and better until he couldn't even tell anymore. Because sometimes he wasn't even there for the event that I was there. I was the only one that was, and yet by the end of it, it was his story. Thieves, ladies and gentlemen, that's what we are. Writers are thieves. And past a certain point, you just understand that and you go with it. You learn to live with it. I will also say that in terms of the genetic aspect of it, I have two daughters. My older daughter is the owner of a print bookstore in Portland, so that apple didn't fall very far from the tree. My other daughter is a painter. She went to the Slade School in London, where she married her husband Tom, who is a Brit. And she and her husband have both lived as painters for a long time. I learned at some point when I went over to when we were visiting her in London, she said, "Oh, by the way, we're going to go to this place tonight. It's called the Young Vic, not to be confused with the Old Vic." Where she said, "Oh, by the way, I've got a one-act play that we're going to see that night." She hadn't mentioned anything about that. But she did small things like that. She was not she was not a reader. She was the of my two daughters, the one who learned visually, which is why she went to art school. She was not a huge reader. She found that the written word was sometimes confusing. Turn the page, she'd be reading in a textbook, she'd go down the page and be completely confused and turn the page, and then there'd be a graph, and she'd go, "Oh, okay, now I understand." So she was the family oddball in that respect, and she tried and tried and tried not to live a life of words, and finally gave up. Her first novel was published 2 years ago. She has a new novel coming out next year. And she finally just had to just say, all right, fine, I'll be a writer. There. So there's something, I don't know. There's something that genetics may have something to do with it. I'm glancing at my watch here too, because I don't want to, I either forget the time or forget the watch. But there are a number of other things that I'd love to touch on here, and I will open it up to all kinds of Q&A, whatever you'd like to follow up with. I'm here, so we can take the time that we want. Why do I write? I think part of the reason that I write is just a kind of my psychological makeup. I am, you won't be surprised to learn, if you have read any of my books, or certainly if you've read more than one, that I am a cautious optimist. And I would say that if you want to be a writer, if you want to be a writer or really an artist of any sort, you have to be at least a little bit of an optimist. Because who wants to take the amount of time it takes to do good work in any art, whether it's writing, whether it's poetry or filmmaking or painting or any of the arts? Who wants to embark on a journey without a reasonable expectation of success? Would you? Would anybody want to go on a journey where you thought at the beginning that you really stood no chance of getting there? You don't do that. No rational person does that. But I guess what I'm getting at is that we read writers that we think of as hugely pessimistic, and I'm not one of those. If you read my books, you'll find that the characters' lives don't change in a sweeping way, but they do change. My longest book, Bridge of Sighs, begins with a character named Lucy Lynch telling the reader, "My wife and I are going to Venice." And the problem with his assertion at that point on the first page of Bridge of Sighs is that it's a damn lie. He's doing everything he can, kind of on the sly, to make sure that journey never happens. He has no intention of going to Venice because he's afraid that if he goes there, that his best friend, that he suspects the woman that he married is still in love with, that they'll get back together again. So he says, well, my wife and I are going to Venice. He has no intention of doing it, right? By the end of an 800 was my longest novel, probably in manuscript it was over 1,000 pages, probably 750 in book form. At the end of that 750 pages, Lucy Lynch looks us readers straight in the eye and says, my wife and I are going to Venice. The difference is that now he is. So that's the kind of, when I say I'm a cautious optimist, and you'll find that a lot in my books, is that people don't start out with nothing and become wildly successful, but they make the kinds of journeys that are meaningful to them. They don't end up in the same place they started. They're going on a journey, and I'm not interested in following them on that journey if I already know that they have no chance of success. Why would I want to follow somebody to watch them fail? Now we know that there are writers out there who write the kinds of books that are deeply and profoundly worrying to the point of being depressing sometimes, and they certainly don't seem like optimistic writers, and that's fine. What I'm saying to you about optimism and about art is that you may come to terrible conclusions about the journey that you're on, but you have to be optimistic in order to start it. You just, as an artist, you just don't go there if you don't think you have any chance of success. Why else do I write? Well, it took me a while, but it seems to me that let me put it this way. writing is not what I think. It's how I think. I probably don't need to tell you this, but in real life, and in the kind of just everyday life where you talk with people, get to exchange stories or whatever. But as we talk to people in real life, I can be as glib as anybody, and I've come to understand that I don't trust myself terribly. Here I am in a very public situation like that, but I've also come to understand that I don't trust myself very well in public situations like this. In part because over the years I've learned how to do it. I can, as I'm doing now, I can stand here in front of you and share some of what I've learned and some of the reasons that I like to write, or that I want to write. But there's a difference between being able to stand up in front of people, which is something that a lot of public people can do. Politicians certainly can do it. Can stand up in front of people and talk and talk and talk. But they're talking about what they think, or trying to convince you anyway of what they think. Writing, I've come to understand, is not about what I think, it's about how I think. And so when I put words on the page, if I were to say something on the page that I said to somebody yesterday in real life, putting it on the page tells me whether I really believe it or not. Because the kinds of glib things that we say to each other, they might have the ring of truth. The way you say it, the way you convey it, might have something to do with it. But boy, when I put words on the page, then suddenly I'm forced to say, do I really believe this? Or is it just something I'm saying? And I remember when Philip Roth, a number of years ago, at the end of a long and stellar career, announced at a ripe old age, I think he was in his 80s, he announced that he was through. He just said, I'm done. I've had a great career. I've done the kind of books that I want to write, but it's just too hard anymore. I'm getting too old. I just can't see my way to write any more books. And when I heard that he had said that, or I can't remember whether I read that he had said it or heard that he had said it, what I remember thinking was, I just don't think that that's possible. Maybe it's possible for him, but I don't think it's possible for me, because since writing is not what I think, but how, if writing is how I think, then saying that I don't want to write books anymore is like, to me, saying I don't want to breathe anymore, because that's just what I do. And so for those of us for whom words on paper take on a much greater weight, and words on paper teach us what we truly believe by putting them down there and seeing if they stand up, I don't think quitting is possible. I know it's possible to write poorly, put it that way. The day will come, I'm sure. I'm 75, and now it takes me twice as long to do half as much. But that still doesn't change the need on a daily basis to challenge myself in this particular way, because I don't really have, at least I don't see another option. I'm not sure that I'll even see another option when my agent or my editor or my publisher tell me that it's time to quit. Because in fact, you've lost that much break off your curveball. The fastball is hovering down there about 72 miles an hour. The ball is leaving the park. time to quit. They'll be right. I'm not saying they'll be wrong. I'm just saying it's not going to make any difference. I'm in for the long haul. The other thing I would say about the other reason to continue writing, and the thing that's been one of the most important reasons why I continue to write, is that the possibility that writing does make you a better person. Our stock and trade, writers, our stock and trade is empathy. And it's empathy that does allow you to grow as a human being, I think. And just as important as the fact that empathy has the ability to make you a better person today than you were yesterday, just as importantly, or perhaps even more importantly, empathy, trying your best to live somebody else's life as truly as you can, allows a writer to do something that is just, I can't stress how important it is. To live somebody else's life, to become another character, allows you as a writer to do the thing that you may need to do more than anything else, and that is get out of your own damn way. One of my favorite characters, I've been writing for a long time now, one of my favorite characters is somebody that I probably had no business at all writing about. Sister Ursula from The Horror's Child. She is an octogenarian Belgian nun. Now, Richard Russo, what business on earth do you have writing about an octogenarian Belgian nun? None whatsoever, except that I love that woman as much as any character that I have ever created. I am not sure that some of my readers have told me how important Sister Ursula was to them. I'm not sure that would be the audience, that would be the reaction if all the people in this room were in fact octogenarian Belgian nuns. I'm not sure that they would say, "Oh man, you nailed that. You just nailed that. Thank God someone came along and wrote a story about octogenarian Belgian nuns." No, that's not going to happen. But the empathy that is necessary to create a character like that and absolutely fall in love with her, as I did with Sister Ursula, also does. If you can do that, then you understand what the important thing is. And you're able to get out of your own way, and that is what will allow you to get into the lives and souls of other people. And finally, I'll just say one thing, and then we can maybe open up to questions here. I continue to write, as I say, I continue to write also, frankly, to entertain myself. I don't think it would be possible for me, for me to entertain anyone, any of you, if I hadn't first entertained myself. And it sounds like an arrogant thing to say, but sometimes I just get the biggest kick out of some things that I don't see coming. I sit down to write that day, I haven't seen it coming, and I get a tremendous charge out of it. And I'm just going to give you a short example of what I'm talking about. The kind of thing that where if you entertain yourself, you maybe have a chance of entertaining other people. In my novel Everybody's Fool, and all the Fool novels, one of the most important characters in it is Rob, Sully's sidekick, Rob. He's in all three of the books, and he is one of my all-time favorite characters in it. And I'm always thrilled by his company. One of the reasons that I kept going back and writing these Fool novels was not just that I loved Sully, but I loved all those characters, Carl Roebuck, and the whole slew of those characters, and none of them really more than Rub. But in Everybody's Fool, Sully finds a dog or it's actually Rub that finds the dog, but it becomes Sully. So this dog is wandering around on the side of the road on an icy winter day, freezing and dying. And the dog becomes Sully. And Sully's first impulse, of course, is the dog has a collar on it, which tells the dog's name. But Sully's first impulse, of course, is to name the dog Rub. And it becomes Rub's dog. So that when he issues a command, he wants to see which one of them Rub the man or Rub the dog will obey the command. So Rub the dog is a constant. Both Rubs are very important to this novel, Everybody's Fool. Anyway, that's the background to it. I'm just going to read you this one short paragraph about Sully bringing Rub the dog around with him to the various places that he goes. The canine Rub, the dog, Rub the dog, was relatively young in years, but old in experience. Most of it, Sully suspected, awful. Consequently, this Rub's youth, energy, and congenital optimism were in constant conflict with his memories, which dictated extreme caution, and when that was not sufficient, flight. After 6 months of Sully's benign neglect, Rub the dog still started violently at sudden loud noises. And if his new master forgot and raised his voice, he would empty his bladder on the spot. The dog seemed to love him, though, and when Rub wasn't peeing on things, Sully was able to return his dumb affection. Until recently, he had let Rub the dog tag along with him wherever he went, including Hattie's restaurant. But the animal had recently picked up a genital parasite somewhere and had taken to chewing on his dick. Not surprisingly, the sight of his bloody, masticated little pud put people off their feed. When he was on the premises at Hattie's, you couldn't give away link sausages. Okay. That's why I write. that's why I write. Just to be able to see that dog is just such a pleasure, such an honor. I am so grateful. I am so grateful to have been able to live the life that I have lived as a storyteller. It's just been a gas from start to finish. And I'll just end by saying that these, I think, are difficult times right now for writers. I think it's a much more difficult time for my daughter Kate than it ever was for me. But it's also difficult because of the way the world is right now. When we get up in the morning, when I get up in the morning, when we all get up in the morning, we are faced with a world, whether we're talking about climate change or whether we're talking about the disordered parts of the world which seem to be expanding into various wars in Ukraine and in the Middle East. To read the Times in the morning, if you are an artist, I think, of any description at all, no matter what, whether you're a filmmaker or a painter or whatever it is, in times like these, and we do have that election coming up. In times like these, sometimes we artists wake up in the morning and think to ourselves, are we just fiddling while Rome burns here? Is that what we're doing? Are we fiddling while Rome burns? How do we tell ourselves that storytelling is important in this world? How is it that I can get up in the morning and write about Rub the dog, or write about whatever it is that I happen to be writing about that day? of what possible use is that in times like these. But I think the other argument can be made too, that in times like these, it's never been more important than to do this. Ann Patchett and I were on a book tour a couple of years ago. We both had books out at the same time. Her book Tom Lake was out at the same time that Somebody's Fool was out, and we met at her bookstore and then in a couple of other places where we talked together. And we came up with, I think, a motto, a mantra that we try to remind ourselves all the time, and it becomes necessary pretty much every day to remind ourselves that, how did we put it exactly? If it mattered before, it still does. If it doesn't now, it never did. What do you think? Seems like that seems about right to me, although I do have to tell myself that every single morning. Thank you all so much for coming tonight. Thank you. Thank you all right. Let's just open it up to some questions here, and if there's somebody who's in charge of not making sure that this doesn't go too long, then you'll give me the high sign. It's this, by the way. That's the that's the sign. Okay, questions? Yes.
So when I'm reading fiction, oftentimes my internal voice says to me, "Where is the author taking you?" And as the author, do you know where you're going when you're writing?
If I knew where I was going, I wouldn't write the book. That's the journey. That's the journey for me. Usually, what happens, and not every writer would say that. Would say that. John Irving, a wonderful writer, often says that why would anybody embark upon a journey if you didn't know the destination? He likes to write the last paragraph of his novels first, and then he writes towards those. I think where John Irving and I would probably agree, though, is that even though that's his particular practice and it would never be mine, I think that where we would agree, though, is that if you have an idea, you just be a damn fool to stick with the original idea when you have a better one. And part of the journey is discovery. Okay, he may know what that last paragraph is, but he's going to be surprised along the way. And that's the good news. The idea that you can be, you can think you know it's Tuesday, and you think you know what you're going to write on Wednesday, and then you start writing on Wednesday, and suddenly you think, oh my God, here I am on page 270 in this book. That's where I was on on Tuesday. On Wednesday, I start to write, and I write a line of dialogue, and I say to myself, that's the first line of the book. Those kinds of surprises are gifts. It changes everything. But it's so much easier now with computers. You just block that out and rearrange things, and you're good to go. But I will sometimes have an idea about where I'm headed. And sometimes it's a better idea than others. Sometimes there are a few surprises. Sometimes there are many surprises. But I will tell you this: that when I wrote Empire Falls, when John Voss takes that gun and points it at Miles' daughter, and says, "This is what I dream," I did not know whether Miles' daughter Tick was going to die in that moment or not. I didn't until I wrote the scene. I did not know whether that child was going to survive. So, but again, I can't stress enough that not knowing is the gift. that it's the journey that you're taking and the discovery. that you make along the way that matters. Other questions? Hi, yeah.
I find myself smiling a lot when I read your books, and I've read every one. But when I read Straight Man,
Mm-hmm.
I actually laughed out loud.
Thank you.
At the scene of the English department meeting.
Yeah.
What I'm wondering is, have you been tempted to write any more books about academia?
Oh, good question. Have I decided to write any more books about academia? No, and I think that decision has been confirmed by AMC's version of Lucky Hank. No, as a matter of fact, strangely enough, you know why I wrote the original Straight Man? It was because I wrote Straight Man. It all came gushing out. I had been collecting, without meaning to, I had been collecting academic lunacy stories in the back of my mind for decades when I was teaching, and I taught at a number of different institutions. So I mean, that book was probably the easiest book of all of mine to write. It caused the least rectal bleeding of all of my books, and I'm very grateful to it. I had an absolute blast writing that book. But the reason that I wrote it was that I wanted to be a full-time writer. And I think I was teaching at Colby College at the time, and I really wanted, to get into full-time teaching. Robert Benton's wonderful movie of Nobody's Fool had just come out, which suggested that maybe now is the time. Why not? If I'm going to take a chance, why not take a chance? Why not take a chance now? And so I thought to myself, I will write a book about the academy that will guarantee that I will never be able to teach in another academic institution again as long as I live. I will be persona non grata everywhere. After this book comes out, I won't be asked. Not only won't be asked to teach, I won't be asked to give talks. I will be gone from the academy forever. And of course, be careful what you wish for, because exactly the opposite of that is what happened. As I said, I taught in a number, 4 or 5 different academic institutions, and I took various snippets of academic lunacy from all of those places that I taught, right? And when I went back to those same places, all of my former colleagues recognized other people in their departments. None of them recognized themselves. Even the ones even the ones that I chose and made the most use of, none of them recognized themselves at all, but they all recognized their colleagues, even the transsexual. Now, how in the world? Anyway, that was the story behind Straight Man. But no, I didn't know. Given what happened with that book, I don't think I dare write another one. Other questions? I'm sorry? Oh, what part of Italy is my family from? I actually have a pretty good idea. I taught recently at a writers' conference. I've been there a couple of times actually in Positano, called Siren. And it's a conference that takes place every year in this incredible hotel in Positano. But I learned when we flew into Naples, and then the car took us up over the mountain and down the other side into Positano and that area around Salerno, the Amalfi Coast, the entire Amalfi Coast. As you come up over the top of that mountain ridge, you come down the other side, it's Russo everything. Russo car parks, Russo garages, Russo everything. You see Russo everywhere, up and down the coast, and that's where my grandfather was from. my grandmother was, I'm trying to think now where she was. My grandfather was from there, from the Amalfi Coast. My grandmother was from farther south, and he pulled the same shit on her that Italians do, regardless of where they are. The northern Italians feel that way about the southern Italians. My grandfather, who was a southern Italian, pulled that on my grandmother because she was even further in the south. So, I mean, if you're south of Naples, you're pretty far south in Italy. But yeah, that's where he was from, and my grandmother was from further south than that.
You know, Busted Town, Denzel Washington's got a big house there.
I heard that.
Oh,
I don't. Yeah.
His whole family.
Yeah.
Takes him there all the time. Everybody knows him, of course, but
Yeah.
anyway, that's his favorite place. Busted Town.
Denzel Washington. That's what our paths did not cross. Yes.
With your writing of Empire Falls and then making the movie here in Maine,
Mm-hmm.
can you share with us a little bit of what it was like to work with Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward and others?
Paul, of course, Paul has a special place in my heart because when I wrote Nobody's Fool, the character of Sully was based on my father. When Paul Newman plays a character of yours, you discover afterwards that character doesn't belong completely to you anymore. and that's what happened as a result of his playing Sully. And of course, I mean, we worked together on other projects too. We worked together on another Robert Benton film called Twilight, not the vampire one. And we worked together, of course, and we worked together again on Empire Falls. And a couple of different movies too. Worked with when you work with actors like Paul Newman, Joanne Woodward. I worked with Philip Seymour Hoffman on 2 projects. When you work with actors like that, it can be very humbling. It's also thrilling. It's exhilarating. I remember thinking about Ed Harris as the main character of Miles Roby in that, and I remember when I heard the casting of what the casting was going to be for that show, and they said it was Ed Harris was going to play Miles Roby, and my heart just sank because the person that I had described physically in Empire Falls is a guy who's worked in this restaurant, this grill, his entire life. He's been eating his own mistakes, for his entire life. The person that I described was James Gandolfini, somebody on that kind of physical spectrum. And then I learned Ed Harris, tiny, trim Ed Harris is going to be playing that role. And then I saw, I visited the set and we looked at a couple of the dailies that had been shot in the last few days. A couple of scenes with Ed Harris and the wonderful young actress who was playing Tick, Miles' daughter. I thought, jeez, this guy was just wonderful. He's physically wrong, but he's so just spiritually. It's just and that's what acting is about. Of course, it's not getting the exterior right; it's getting the interior right. And that's the thrill of working with really great actors. And with everything that I've been involved with, where a great actor has been involved, I've had that feeling that here is somebody that knows something about my character that I didn't know. And there's my favorite scene in Nobody's Fool is a scene that Paul Newman plays, and Robert Benton and I just wrote, it's a scene that's trying to explain why he walked out on his family. And there was a lot of dialogue in the book, and Benton and I kept writing this explanatory dialogue for him to be able to explain to his son why he left him. And Newman just kept sending it back. No, too much. And finally, he just said, look, just put the camera on me. And there was, I think, like 2 lines of dialogue, which I'm not sure were in the book, but they were condensed. They were from the book in the sense that he used the character to extract these lines. I'm not sure that they were actually in the book or in any of the screenplay stuff that we had been feeding to him. It's my favorite scene in the novel, where he just chopped it. He just chopped all of that stuff out. And what's left is simply heartbreaking. It's just, that's what good actors do. How are we doing here? We have time for 1 or 2 more? Okay. Any others? Yes, hi.
Can you describe your experience finding out about your Pulitzer Prize?
My experience of
Learning about the Pulitzer Prize.
Oh. Yeah, the gift that keeps on giving, as they call it. I was. It was an odd experience. Number one, because sometimes, they try to keep it a secret, but sometimes it leaks, and you will get some sort of indication. Your publisher will call, your editor will call, or something like that. We're hearing a rumor. We don't know if it's true. That sort of thing. But that year, I don't think anybody had any idea what was going to win the Pulitzer Prize. There were a ton of great books out that year, and any number of which could have easily won. Mystic River came out that year. Eva Moves the Furniture came out that year. The Jonathan Franzen novel, The Corrections, came out that year. Just a ton of good books. I didn't know what was going to win, but I was pretty convinced that Empire Falls was not. And I had good reason, because the Pulitzer is the last of the major prizes to come out. I think the first is the National Book Award, and there's the National Book Critics Circle Award, and there's the PEN/Faulkner Award. But Empire Falls hadn't even been on the long list for any of those other awards. It was just simply not part of the conversation for the National Book Award, or for the PEN/Faulkner, or for the National Book Critics Circle Award. In fact, it didn't even win didn't appear on the radar of the New England Book Awards either. So when the day came that I knew that the Pulitzer was going to be announced, I said, well, Rick, don't be an idiot. Don't sit around waiting for a phone to ring that's not going to ring. So I and my good friend Jeff Calhoun went out and played tennis. We were having a wonderful match. We stayed much longer than we normally did. And when I got home, I pulled into our driveway, and my wife Barbara came out onto the porch. I took one look at her face. And thought, either somebody we know has died, or I won the Pulitzer. And part of it, and part of it too, was that Barbara just looked so. She just looked horrible, in the sense that, and now of course I know why, because for the last hour she had been picking up the phone, which was just ringing and ringing and ringing. Everybody was calling, and where is he? He should have been home an hour ago. So she was pissed as could be. By the time I arrived, and of course after that I was just on the phone all night. The next day, we were scheduled to go to Spain for my Spanish publisher. The book was coming out there, and when we left, we unplugged the phone because we just could not. That night when we were finished talking, the phone would not stop ringing, so we unplugged the phone. when we left. We got on a flight, we went to Barcelona, we did the stuff that we did there. The Spanish press was not terribly interested when they learned that Empire Falls was not about the fall of America. That's what they seemed to think. They seemed to think that that's what the book was about, and as soon as they learned that it wasn't, they just had other people to talk to. And so we were there in Spain for about, I think, 10 days, maybe close to 2 weeks. And when we got home, Barbara and I got home, 2 weeks afterwards, we went into the kitchen, I picked up the cord, the phone cord, plugged it back into the wall, and I don't think the phone rang for 2 weeks. It was over. So that was my Pulitzer Prize. There's another hand up here too. Yes, ma'am.
Do you write more than one book at a time, or just one, is my first question. And my second is, are you trying to write something that will be banned?
I've been trying all along to write something more than this. I can't seem to attract that kind of attention. With the first part of the book, first part again was
Do you write
more than one book.
Yeah.
No, I usually write whatever novel that I'm writing on is the novel that I'm working on. What I do, however, is that I will, if I find myself stymied somehow in the book, I will. Sometimes you find yourself just looking at something and realizing that the more you stare at it, the more blind you become to it. And when I find that happening, what I'll do is find another project that I can work on. Often it's a screen project that doesn't take me nearly as long. So I'll just take some sort of screen assignment, or I'll just write short stories or essays for a while. And what that allows is since the front of my brain isn't working, I'll just ignore it and allow the back of my brain to work. And usually after a month or so of writing something for the screen, or writing essays, or writing short stories, or whatever, then I'll come back to the book and go, of course. Again, thank you all so much for coming. I appreciate it.